This video is kind of a follow-up to my Forsaken Survivor tier list video, and just generally how much of a weird state the Forsaken balancing is currently in right now. So, to cut to the chase, this video is going to be covering how strong the killers are and my tier list overall. However, for killers especially, there are some very important things to cover before moving on to the actual tier list. Due to how broken survivors are in this game, technically, all killers should be around D tier. I'm not entirely exaggerating when I say this either. If you have to go up against a competent lobby of survivors, then it doesn't really matter how well you play with any killer. You will always lose. This is what makes killers somewhat difficult to rank, since I don't want to just put them all into D tier. Now, I get pubs don't really show this in any regard, though I'm not particularly trying to make a public server tier list either. The whole point of these tier lists really is to highlight the main flaws of each character to the developers / balancers of Forsaken, so like what my previous video aimed to do, push the game into a generally more balanced state. So, while some killers may be in high tiers, just keep in mind it's more of a thing, but they don't really need nearly as much support as compared to the other killers on the tier list, since in true viability, a lot of the killers would just be in very low tiers of how survivors are generally balanced in this game. So, while I may present harsh changes in this video, I'm only really expecting them to be applied to an extent. This is to help reach the game's middle ground for balancing. Okay, now that everything I want is covered, we can finally get on to the actual tier list. Now, starting with the worst killer in the game, and at the bottom of C tier is Slasher. Slasher is honestly a very weird killer. I say weird, not in the sense that he is difficult to understand, but more so how his situation for both balancing and what to do with him is. The main reason why I believe Slasher is weak is due to how easy he is to counter with any sort of teamwork. This is primarily because his base design is genuinely horrid. Don't get me wrong, his M1 and Raging Pace are solid abilities. His M1 does good damage, and his Raging Pace makes him an absolute menace in solo chase. As a matter of fact, I believe all killers should be like Slasher in the sense that they can't loop him for miles on end as long as the killer knows what they are doing. I don't really think it takes a rocket scientist to deduce that being able to loop the killer for more than 2 minutes on your own, simply because it is a bad matchup, is at all fair or balanced. But with all of these upsides, what are the issues with Slasher? It's the fact that the rest of his kit has two of the worst abilities in the entire game, in my opinion. Gashing Wound and Behead are objectively just terrible abilities in the sense that they can never be hypothetically used as long as the survivors play properly. If a Sentinel doesn't leave you open to them, if, for example, they miss a stun, then Gashing Wound has almost no utility outside of pressuring sandbags, which, with how survivors are designed, doesn't even need to be done anyway. Then, Behead, outside of some very niche cases, is only effective at making chases end slightly faster. This is because Behead can only be used as an execution tool realistically, as the slowness it gives to you and insane hit burst it gives to the survivor just gives the survivor distance in almost any way you use it. Sure, you could use it for chip damage if you know you're going to reset chase, but this is quite niche. However, if you're in a lobby with competent survivors, you are never going to be in the position to use Behead in the first place. Compare this to Cool Kid, for example, who has a chase almost identical to Slasher, but now has an extra 2 abilities which can help him end chases even easier and provide a lot more innate pressure through insane burst DPS. Why on earth would you want Gashing Wound over Warp Speed Override? It puts them in a bad position. Cool Kid's Warp Speed Override can be aimed at walls to make them get no knockback from the ability, pretty much leaving you in the exact same position you would be if hit with a Gashing Wound, just 3 less damage dealt? That's also not covering how Warp Speed Override is just infinitely more versatile with a million ways to use it, which doesn't include the survivors making an obvious mistake. Oh, and I forgot to mention how teammates can just position themselves correctly because of how long Gashing Wound takes to finish, meaning you can just support the person who got Gashing Wounded even easier. This is all a trade-off for having all of your pressure instantly denied so long as support is granted to you through one singular resource after Slasher uses Raging Pace. Literally anything which drops the killer in any regard will deny Raging Pace and, subsequently, Slasher as a whole. However, what I think makes this even worse is how, Because of how good Slasher is in the 1v1 scenario, he is a genuine demon in public lobbies. This just makes Slasher super hard to balance, as if you do buff him, the already strong aspect of his kit to most people will be exacerbated, which just makes him horrible to go up against, and it doesn't help either that literally anyone can do this, as Slasher is an extremely simple killer. This is what annoys me so much about this killer. Until he gets reworked, there is practically no point in suggesting changes, since I know it's just going to fuck one side of the community no matter what. Also, if it wasn't abundantly clear, the amount of support Slasher needs as a result of this is generally just abysmal to see. The best form of balancing Slasher can perform on, which is fair for both sides, is Noob, 007 and 7, 2-Time, and Builderman, with the map being Cool Carnival and the intended tunnel being Builderman. This was one of the proposed compositions for balancing in a competitive environment, more known as RFL, and it's quite literally the weakest composition of survivors you could have against this killer, and through testing, as long as you just get one backstab as 2-Time, the killer can't usually do much anyway. So, all I can really do now is just beg for a rework, make him somewhat skill expressive so he can actually be balanced around, since, right now, there is barely anything you can really do which doesn't screw over the casuals or experienced player base. So, this overall just makes Slasher an absolutely disgraceful C tier. Please just get out of my sight. I never want to see you ever again. Now that I've gotten the weakest killer out of the way, we can finally move on to Noseratu, who isn't much better, I'll be honest. Now, he doesn't have the Slasher issue where his abilities can't be used as long as the survivors know what they're doing. But, the abilities themselves are relatively mediocre. Cataclysm is by far his best move, being able to create zones quickly, and is honestly a pretty interesting ability. You have a move which can zone just as well as Corrupt Energy, at the cost of the things preventing the survivors from exiting the zone to be weaker. This means that you could play around the zone or have teammates help you get out of it by tanking the slowness. However, his other moves, like Hunter's Feast, Hook, and Ascension, don't really blend well with this move at all, or any other part of Noseratu's kit, and just puts him in a weird state. He has a 50-50 move, Blood Hook, which is hard to get value from even if hit at medium/long ranges, as the survivors usually have the advantage during the minigame and can just escape. The best application of this move is really when you already have stamina advantage and are blood hooking right on top of the survivor to reset chase practically right next to them, which I guess is handy. However, it does mean the long range blood hook has is practically useless and is only really good for executions. Hunter's Feast is honestly a solid utility with its weakness applied and the buff to it giving invisibility 5, which is just great for ambushing. Then, Ascension is also a pretty decent ability when trying to get good chase reset and apply pressure. The main issue really with Noseratu is how his abilities don't really blend too well together and can be countered easily by good game sense and team coordination. His solo chase is honestly pretty good, though the fact that you can just run through the blood puddles unpunished in most cases and get hit by practically all of his abilities and just survive doesn't feel right. However, with how his kit is designed, it can be difficult to make changes to him without just making him able to do everything when he wants to, if he wants to. So, the best way you can make his abilities blend in together well is probably just by somewhat reducing all of their cooldowns. This way, all of your abilities are generally more accessible and encourages them to be synchronized more to get better value out of them, and just be able to use them more in general and just make him as a whole more impressive. Also, as some more quality of life changes, you can either make Blood Hook better at reeling in survivors from a long distance, or just increase its base damage to either make it better at executing or getting more distance, since right now, 1x's entanglement is just objectively better. Lastly, I would also make the puddles from Cataclysm give slowness too, depending on how far away they are from the killer. This pretty much just means you can't go to the edge of a zone in some cases and just run through the puddle by only taking 1-on-1. And in the absolute best circumstances for the survivor, you sometimes don't even take an M1 as long as the team knows what they're doing. The survivor should respect the zone to a certain extent, and right now you can just cheese it sometimes, which just isn't fun for the killer at all. Also, fixing the bug where Noseratu just loses some puddles at the end of his Cataclysm should probably be addressed to make Cataclysm slightly better. So, with these changes, these should make Noseratu more oppressive and overall fix some of his flaws and his abilities, which should make them more difficult to use, and should just make him healthier for the game overall. However, if none of these issues are really addressed right now, then he's probably going to remain a high C tier, and I don't know, just not be used. I mean, okay, he's decently used, but I'm just kind of yapping at this point. Just move on to the next section already. Starting off with B tier, we have Nolley, and to be honest, Nolley isn't the worst, but definitely not the best. His whole idea is that he's supposed to be a trickster slash rushdown archetype. Both of his chase tools, Nova and Void Rush, can help quite a lot when confirming kills. However, I am just going to get straight to the main point here. Nolley is extremely slow in chase. His base stats are honestly terrible, and don't really work at all with what he's supposed to be. There's a reason why both Slasher and Cool Kid have 28 sprinting speeds. It helps a lot with their entire archetype of rushing down the survivor and being able to make progress quickly. But what does Nolley have? 27.5 sprinting speed with not enough walk speed to allow him to catch up. However, what's worse is that the Trapper, John Doe, has literally better stats for catching up to the survivor, which is just crazy to me. This also means Nolley is the first killer to have the issue of only having the first stamina bar really matter. I guess Noseratu has this issue too, but due to the speed of certain killers, they sometimes take way too long to catch up, or don't even catch up at all in the first place, to where you practically are forced to constantly chase reset to apply pressure. This is usually because their walk speed is too slow to maintain constant pressure in the chase. This creates issues where, as long as you get a pretty good chase start, it's hard for Nolley to do anything, nor can he piggyback off of his abilities quite well, since they don't really make up for this, and can just make his general oppression a lot weaker. I guess Nova could follow up into an M1 if you have enough distance to do so, and Voidish into a slam, but this also somewhat depends on the distance, and again, a good chase start can usually just avoid this completely. Now, with the recent changes Nolley has received, it seems that instead of addressing Nolley's main issue of speed, they just decided to overtune Void Rush. In a sense, this is what is making Nolley B tier for me currently, as his Void Rush, unlike before really, can be used quite well to extend the time of which Nolley has pressure now, as it is generally more consistent and overall just gets more value. Though, to be entirely honest, the Void Rush buff is only really fun for the killer, and this makes Nolley more infuriating to play against, now that he can now almost do entire 360s with a single rush. Also, something I don't see people talk about a lot with Nolley is his very weird damage structure. In some cases, all it takes is for a total of 1 HP to be healed to make your chase extended by at least 20 seconds due to the fact that you're able to take an extra M1. This is pretty significant and makes healers very strong against Nolley. So, with all of these issues addressed, the main changes I would make to Nolley would be to buff his base stats. These changes would be maybe his sprinting speed from 27.5 to 27.75, or maybe make a walk speed buff too, or instead of just buffing his sprint speed, which, even though I think buffing his sprinting speed would be way better, either way he would be able to catch up and chase, so a win is a win, I guess. Then, as more of a quality of life change, I would buff Nova to roughly 20 damage, making it so Nolley's damage setup isn't as unstable as it currently is. You could also add some quality of life changes to Observant too, like making it faster, or even applying the hallucination the moment you pick a generator to teleport to, kind of like Six's Blood Rush the moment it is used. This is to make it so any form of pressure that could possibly make it so Observant can't be used, like a stun for example, isn't nearly as effective because it's just easier for Nolley to use the ability in the first place. Also, this would just generally improve the pace of the game for the Nolley, which would be just a nice addition. Another thing you could do as well is to make it so all possible generators which can spawn on the map do spawn, obviously being fake if there are more than 5 real generators, to eliminate its RNG factor as well. A teleport to some generators can zone survivors away from specific loops, which can be the difference between short/long chases. However, sometimes the generator may just not spawn at the loop, leaving you kind of defenseless and having to deal with possibly a really bad check spot for you. However, To compensate for these buffs, the buffs applied to Nolley's Void Rush should probably be halved or just removed completely. He doesn't need it anymore really, now that he can actually catch up and chase, and generally just makes the move more skill expressive and not as easy to extend chases with for Nolley. These changes should address Nolley's main current issue with base speed and some abilities not making up for it, while slightly nerfing Void Rush to make Nolley more fun to play against and as skill expressive as he was before. However, again, if none of these changes are applied, then he is probably going to remain a low B tier. Then, following Nolley, we have John Doe. This is a character which I think may have the most differing views when it comes to balancing in the entire game. I see some people say he is the worst, others thinking he is the best, and some believing he is right in the middle, like me. To be entirely honest, John Doe's in a pretty decent spot. The recent balance change, which meant he is no longer so vulnerable to stuns, means he is honestly pretty good. The only thing I don't really like about John Doe is that he kind of has the slasher issue in the sense that you only really need to counter one of his abilities in order to make him significantly weaker, as compared to his whole kit. However, this is a lot harder to pull off in general due to his generally lower cooldowns and just generally requiring a lot more communication from the survivors and skill overall to survive. While a well-timed plasma beam or gas charge can make you escape a zone relatively easily, the survivors do need to know what they are doing, and as I find John Doe to be one of the harder killers to go against, I believe this is fine. The only changes I would really make to John Doe would be to completely get rid of Sniper Doe, since that just isn't how the character is supposed to be played. To do this, you could decrease the spike damage from 12 to 9, but to compensate, make his spikes come out slightly faster or just give him 4 to 5 more spikes. This way, Sniper Doe is less effective, and survivors are able to pressure zones more as they take less damage from being hit with spikes, though in turn giving him more options for zoning, so it isn't as easy to pressure zones in the first place. The main reason why you want to buff zoning if spike damage was nerfed is because it would be too easy to just run through the spikes and be able to take more risks when pressuring them, such as escaping a zone, while the John Doe is using corrupt energy, which could reduce his viability by a lot. You still need to make it so John Doe is actually able to zone, and if you just nerf the spike damage and just don't give him any zoning tools to counter that, then it's just going to make his zoning a lot weaker. However, if the balancers don't care too much about keeping Sniper Doe, then he could probably just stay how he is now, and I don't think he needs to be stronger, and if you were to buff his strength, it would probably just make him more unhealthy in the process. Bear in mind, this isn't me saying John Doe is strong, but in his current state, it's definitely the most healthy killer in the game, on most maps, and requires good skill on both ends to truly reach either side's full potential. So, whether these changes are implemented or not, John Doe will probably remain a mid-B tier killer, which is honestly fine. I don't think John Doe really needs any changes. Now, moving on with the tier list, I have 1x above John Doe, and technically is the third best killer in the game. However, let me just say something before I truly begin this section. This killer is some of the worst design I've ever seen from a character in a video game. What do you mean I just lose the chase if I get unlucky with entanglement or mass infection? This guy's entire gimmick is just gambling. All of the projectiles are reactable due to the insanely long windup, so it's all just a game of prediction on whether or not you actually land your abilities. Now, in some cases, this isn't entirely true, but for most it definitely is. I don't really know what to say about this character, which hasn't already been said / no. He isn't fun to play as, nor is he fun to play against, and overall isn't healthy for the balancing of the game due to the fact that it all just comes down to luck. Of course, the best thing to do in this situation would be to give 1x a rework, but guess what? He's already got one, and it made him even worse to play against and exacerbated all of his issues. Out of all the killers in this game to super buff, you choose 1x. Why? He was relatively weak before, but arguably deserved to be weak due to his flawed design. The only thing I can realistically suggest here is either gutting the character completely, as he doesn't deserve to be as strong as he currently is, or just make it so he actually gets a good kit, which doesn't rely on luck completely. I generally don't know what they were thinking when designing this character, and for how long he was in the game before he got a rework, thought that his kit wasn't problematic. I'm just going to go off script here for a second. Like, if we're going to give a character a rework, please generally just fix the issues of the character and just know what you're doing beforehand, because this doesn't fix anything. This is stupid. I hate this. The only thing which is actually good about this rework was the fact the entanglement minigame just got replaced with a fixed pull and a fixed stun, which made it so if you're on PC, you didn't just get screwed over by just being on the device you're on. I think that was fine. Everything else just needs to change. This killer is horrible. Yeah, I hate this guy. You know, as much as, like, okay, I might generally hate 1X as much as he hates Shaletsky, bro. Like, it's that bad. Like, I hate this guy. But he's also pretty cool, so I guess it's true. However, Cool Kid isn't in as serious of a balancing crisis as many of the other killers in this game. As a matter of fact, I believe Cool Kid is honestly a pretty solid killer, and overall just does everything a killer needs to do correctly balance-wise. Cool Kid's solo chase is honestly just solid. Good sprinting speed to apply pressure, minions to put people into awkward spots, and high bursts of damage which plays into his first stamina bar gimmick quite well. Cool Kid does require the team to be switched on in terms of support if the Cool Kid knows what they are doing, and better yet, doesn't have the issue Slasher has due to how his kit has lots of variables and generally just requires good game sense and ability usage to use effectively. The only real issue I have with this killer really is a specific playstyle of how he can be used. Some players may throw the good levels of consistently Cool Kid may have with this pressure and just gamble Walks with Override in the open. Sometimes, this is the only thing you can really do with this killer, as much as I hate how you kinda have to do this, to say it isn't effective would be a lie. It hinges on the fact that Cool Kid is quite dependent on his Walks with Override for damage, especially when your minions are on cooldown, as it can be relatively difficult to catch up from a medium distance, which is what gambling Walks with Override kind of avoids. So, I believe a pretty simple fix to this would just be nerfing Walks with Override's damage, but slightly buffing every other aspect about Cool Kid, and even the versatility of Walks with Override to compensate. This could be through buffing the damage of his M1 by simply 1 to 3-shot Elliot, or just making the hitbox ever so slightly bigger, increasing the damage Brick deals by 5, or making it apply an extra 0.5 seconds to 1 second of slowness, and reducing the cooldown of pizza delivery minions have by roughly 5 to 7 seconds. However, to compensate for all of these changes, the base damage of Walks with Override would be reduced to 25, burning inflicted by Walks with Override would be decreased by 2 to 3 seconds if hit, and overall just increasing the cooldown of Walks with Override by 5 seconds. This should make Cool Kid overall just a lot more healthy for the game, and just make it so he's slightly more fun to fight, because right now it does kind of just feel like shit sometimes when you just lose a gamble, and there's not really much you can do, especially if Cool Kids just kind of take advantage of the fact that you can aim Walks with Override and just put you in bad positions. It's just not fun. So making it so Walks with Override is generally just less oppressive, but making literally everything else about him, which is more consistent, more oppressive, should make the killer a lot more healthy in the long run. Now, you might be wondering why I went straight from B tier to high A/low S tier, and that's mainly to emphasize that Sixer is honestly one of the best killers in the game right now, and it's not even close. They have an extremely strong normal form, which can end chases quite quickly with insane speed you get from both Blood Rush and Infernal Cry, which just makes Sixer very oppressive and demand lots of team support from the survivors. Not only this, but the great tools at your disposal, such as Eviscerate and Demonic Pursuit, allow you to easily get blood through the base gain and blood orbs through Hemorrhage. However, the main reason why they're so strong right now is due to how the collision hitbox got fixed a couple months back. This means they're no longer at a mathematical disadvantage with the distance needed to cover to catch up with the survivor if they decided to abuse short loops with many turns / things to get stuck on. However, even with all of this, the ability to end chases quickly and get blood easily, they still have another form, Blood Hunt, which is pretty much a reward for playing well with Sixer and getting good blood. To be honest, the only issue I have with Blood Hunt really is that it's quite dependent on hitting Infernal Cries to probably get value from, as it is by far his best ability in this mode. This is because the buffs it gives you are really good for ending the chase quickly, which is exactly what you need in such a tight time frame like Blood Hunt. So, buffing his base stats Sixer gets in Blood Hunt by roughly 2% from 4% could help with this, and buffing the damage dealt by Demonic Pursuit by roughly 10% as well could help with just how much oppression he has outside of Infernal Cry in Blood Hunt in general. However, to compensate, a 1-second reduction in buff duration for both buffs applied to Sixer when hitting Cry, and an increase in the cooldown of the ability by 2 to 3 seconds while in this mode may help a lot with making Sixer more consistent in Blood Hunt. But, to not make this base stat increase stacked with the buffs given by Infernal Cry, you could make it to a return to a 4% increase in base stats to make it go at the same speed he already is going at now, as he's already going really fast anyway, so I don't think this needs a buff. Also, as a general quality of life change to Sixer in his normal form, making you be able to see blood orbs via aura reading and increasing their lifespan by roughly 15 to 30 seconds could help a lot, as it makes gathering blood easier and makes it feel as if the game isn't limiting you for farming too much blood, aka just playing well. However, without these changes, Sixer is still a strong high A/low S tier character who is already really strong in his current state, so no immediate action should probably be done to it, and all I can really ask is to just please focus on the other kills first. They desperately need it more than Sixer. So, to conclude this video, I just want to preface that, again, in terms of true versatility, these rankings for killers on the tier list aren't going to be insanely accurate, since either way, in a competent lobby, with access to the resources the game currently gives you, you are probably going to lose anyway as killer. This, in a sense, is more of a killer ranking video, and the tier list just helps showing how large the gaps between each killer are. However, my original point still stands on how this tier list documents quite well how much external support a killer needs to be generally strong and what the Forsaken developers should do to each killer in order to fully fix them. Again, not all of these changes represented in this video I expect to actually make it to the main game. Just as long as the balance changes made to the game are similar to mine and/or tackle the main faults of each killer is all I can really ask for. So, thank you, the viewer, for watching this video, especially if you watched it in full, as it really helps out the channel. Other forms of support, such as subscribing, liking, and commenting, really help the video in the algorithm as well, so any form of that type of support is also greatly appreciated. However, that's all I really have to say about Forsaken's killers, and again, thanks to the people who helped me create this video. You know who you are, and I appreciate your feedback a lot. So yeah, that's all I have to say. See ya.